several comments on ranging from Morocco and otherwise. So we'll talk about that next. So I'm going to switch over to the philanthropy deck and buy some time for Zach until he joins. Zach Nasser, I met in Dubai on the world tour. Remember in the St. Regis, and since then we've been in contact talking about deals and about impact, and you know, he's been in sync with our vision, because we want to, you know, as you can see here, the family offices look for 7 things, not just, you know, good deals, capital for their deals, talent, short-term, long-term for their portfolio or advisors, great global networks, local networks, the crystal balls, interesting experiences. And then this last grouping, we've always had next gen and impact, but really everyone's got these passion projects. You know, alumni networking was my passion project that led to this. And then, you know, that fits into all these industries and interests, as well as we connect into these alumni and companies. You know, companies have philanthropies, and obviously schools themselves in a way are effectively philanthropies. I just read today's LinkedIn, $120 billion hit on the education system. So, you know, where are we going to make up that gap? And then as part of this, I'll throw into the chat. It's pretty easy to take this survey. You know, this is what we'd like to do, is just to know what your interests are so that we can help collaborate across those interests. Just gonna throw it into the chat while we're here. And, you know, we're excited that we have, with the app, we also are now able to track people's philanthropic interests. So with that said, I'd like to turn to you, Zach. I'm just seeing if you're on. There you are. I see you, but I don't see.
Yes, Mark. I'm on.
Okay, great. So I'd like to let you take it from here. And I'm just going to throw this on the screen. And I don't know if we've got Maurizio's picture up there yet, but he's a new addition, or an old addition that's come back when we had our impact event in March. And he'll tell us about the Amazon forest and his initiatives there. Over to you, Zach.
Yes, thanks for the intro, Mark. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. Yes, as Mark was mentioning, we had a last-minute change. Rob couldn't make it, so we're going to have Maurizio Tota speak. He's an expert in environment. He's done a lot of amazing projects in Amazon and renewable energy as well. So today we are going to cover, let me open my video. We're going to cover different areas. We're going to have 4 speakers. First, we're going to start with Mamadou, who's right now at Visa, but he's had a lot of experiences in Africa. So he's going to share about how to be more scientific with philanthropy, to take more risks, and also about lessons learned while working with the Rockefeller Foundation. So lessons that could be applied in your family office or foundation. Then after that, we're going to have Maurizio speak. I guess he's going to talk about his work in the Amazon and his method of conserving the Amazon or managing forests in a sustainable way while doing more with it as well. Then we're going to have Nicole speak about the rights for amputees and rights for physical activity, and how her experience was as an athlete, an amputee athlete. She's based out of Seattle, so it could be related to US policies and whatnot. And then finally, we have Charles, who's going to speak about education. Charles has had a lot of experience in education. He was with Teach for America. You've probably heard of it before, which is a nationwide program. Yeah, that's an intro for the speakers. And this is our first event within philanthropy. The goal is to have a sampling of different topics covered, so that if you're interested in education, you get to hear about different areas as well. And then there probably will be deep dives, like there's a education deep dive in December, for example, that Sarah's working on, others are working on. So this is just meant to be a sampler. And like Mark mentioned, if you could fill the survey so that we know what you're interested in, what organization, foundations you're connected to, so that we could bring people to speak in future events about different topic areas. And encourage more collaboration within philanthropy. So that's it for the intro. We could jump right to it with Mamadou. He's online right now. Mamadou, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Zach, I can hear you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the call. And yeah, we could just get started then. His video is showing now, so you could see Mamadou. Mamadou has had a lot of experiences in the past. It's a pretty accomplished career, so I'm excited to hear what he has in tune for us. So yeah, just over to you, Mamadou. I'll let you get.
All right. Thank you very much, Zach, and greetings to everybody on the call. So I'm very excited to join today and just share a few insights on my experience working and promoting philanthropy. Zach asked me to share insights from my previous work with the Rockefeller Foundation in Africa, and how actually philanthropy can play a pioneering role actually in addressing big societal challenges that we face as society, and how we can do that at scale in a sustainable and transformative way. So my experience in philanthropy are twofold, right? In my career, I have worked with the United States African Development Foundation in Senegal, the country I'm from, and USAIDF really supports grassroots organizations. It is part of the US government's what we could call decentralized actually corporation, which provides seed capital to groups from a vulnerable background, actually to start fund undertaking or entrepreneurship ideas to learn skills, put their skills at work, and to develop their activities in order to improve their livelihood. The second is actually I have over the past 6 years been leading the Rockefeller Foundation's work in Africa as a managing director. And lastly, I serve as an advisor on the a member on the advisory board of the Center for African Philanthropy and Social Change at the University of Witwatersrand. So a couple of things I wanted to really share from that is today these big challenges that we are talking about, we face are really big challenges that are very big for any individual organization. Hence, partnerships and multi-stakeholder partnerships are a great way to address those challenges, whether we are talking about inequality, or we are talking about youth employment, or we're talking about health, access to health and or to jobs or what have you. But in all of this, every entity has an important role to play, whether it is government with policy, whether it is financial institutions to provide financial services, etc. Corporates play a big role because in all of these experiences, one of the things that I've seen is that philanthropic organizations, whether these are charities and others, can oftentimes support very good work that really are transformative of people's lives. But one of the big challenges we encounter in the field are first, the scalability of these programs. How do you get them to really touch a wide population and not just a small group and be transformative for them? The second type of challenge I've seen is mostly the sustainability of actions, because oftentimes these good programs actually work as long as the funding is being extended. And after that, if you come back a couple of years later, most of the part you wouldn't see these projects that have been funded actually still continue to exist or grow in the way that has been expected. So one of the things, this is why actually private sector has a big role, but oftentimes also bringing solutions or embracing these new transformative ideas is a high risk. It is a high risk for private sector because obviously it's a bit difficult for them to invest in risky ideas, extremely risky ideas, because they are accountable for their quarterly returns. It is also difficult for government to undertake them because there is a heavy burden on government, a lot of demand, a lot of competing priorities, and obviously governments are oftentimes also worried with the next election and how citizens react to things. So basically that limits their ability really to invest in innovative ideas and take that risk. And this is where actually philanthropy plays a unique role, because philanthropic organizations, by definition, actually can work with anybody. They don't have the pressure of quarterly returns. They don't have the political pressure around elections or so. But of course, they should be also accountable and ask a question for the ROI of every dollar they can invest. But this position them in a unique, help them be positioned in a unique role of really providing that, enabling that capital, that risk capital that actually spurs innovation, tests the innovation, and develop proof points, or what we could call develop the business case for government to come in and scale, or private sector to take it as a market-based solution and scale it and take it to scale and make it also sustainable. So what I just want to, why I'm talking about this is just to say because I understand there are in the audience investors, also people who are in family foundations, is just to say that actually philanthropy can have that power of being the oil that actually makes the wheel of progress run smoothly by injecting risk capital and enabling others to come behind. The second thing I want to say is, let me put one example around that of what that we talked. One of the examples is, how do you unlock more capital for development programs? And one of these ideas were actually, how do you mobilize private capital to actually buy matured investment from development DFIs, development finance institutions. As we know, those development finance institutions actually invest in economic and social transformation projects with low interest, long-term capital, and they can only fund as many because these come to maturity oftentimes much earlier, but the capital is already locked, which actually limits their ability to fund new projects. And one of the things that we've done with Rockefeller Foundation is actually looking at how then, when a project by a DFI is actually being successful, but remains many years for its end or maturity, then how do you take that and mobilize private capital to take up this project? And that allows to infuse fresh capital to the DFI and allow it to be able to undertake new investment in others. So those are really approaches that actually unlocks capital to be able to do more. The other one I want to talk about is really the power of partnership. I think that this is a no-brainer for many of you, but how do you do it in a purpose way? I think that really having these multi-stakeholder platforms are extremely, extremely powerful. One of the examples I want to bring today is really the Partnership for Inclusive Agricultural Transformation in Africa. Because we know in Africa, agriculture is very important. In most of the countries, more than half the population live of agriculture. It's smallholder farmers that farm on average 1 hectare per year on a family, and really makes them very, very vulnerable. So for a long time, it has mobilized a lot of investment, but not helping really always people cross, or farmers cross the poverty line, their social mobility. So one of the reasons is also the perception of risk in the sector, but also the fact that interventions are not coming together. And the Partnership for Inclusive Agricultural Transformation, for the first time, brought a number of major agriculture donors to come together and leverage each other, put together their financing to achieve the power of influence, investment capital that would allow them really to embark on a systems change in agriculture with the goal of, for instance, in this particular case, touching 30 million smallholder farmers, farm households in 11 African countries. And this was a partnership between the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and USAID, DFID, and the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. This allowed really to mobilize a sizable amount of money, and but more importantly, to really use the strengths of each of these organizations, the power of their brands, but also their influence and expertise towards a common ambitious goal to actually do that. So today, PIATA is really having a huge impact in many countries, working to transform the smallholder farmers into entrepreneurs. So could any of these organizations do it alone? Probably. Would it be at this scale? Probably. Would it be as fast? Maybe. But I think that really coming together really raised the issue to many stakeholders, to governments, but actually it brought really leveraged the total strengths of all the organizations, and today is having a real impact on the continent. So those are really two more key points I thought that I will talk about today, and just be available for, happy to respond to questions and thoughts.
Awesome.
Around this. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Mamadou. Thank you for all the insights. So yeah, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask related to these topics?
I actually have a question. This is Sarah. I do work in Africa, and I'm curious to know what metrics you use to identify success.
Okay, depends really, but you know, every project depends, or this initiative depends on what are the changes that you are set to actually achieve. So if you take Piata, the one I have talked about, first of all, I've talked about the goals. One is the number of farmers reach where, but it's not about reaching them. It is actually supporting them to transform their work and transform their lives by adopting new technologies, and how the adoption of the technologies and having access to resources that they didn't have before, how all of that have actually impacted their trade or their farms. You can measure really by the level of adoption of technology, the impact of technology on yields, the impact of yields on income, and the impact of income on the farm, in more investment in the family well-being. So there are so many indicators for success measurement, but they always actually, I think, should be human-centric, because the change is really, you are looking for is really changing the life of your beneficiary for better outcomes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Mamadou.
Awesome. Okay.
Just a quick thought. Yep. This is
Okay.
Rob here. You mentioned DFIs, and I recall the German DFI, DEG, was very active in things like solar in Africa and other renewables. Has that played out consistent? And I guess the big home run in this was Celtel, as I recall, a few years back, where there was the private equity transaction and the movement towards wireless, and then even payment processing. Could you speak just a little bit about the sort of the returns to the DFIs and the patience level, or that type of re-upping?
Yeah, no, I can make a brief mention on that, not specifically on that, but for instance, if you take energy in Africa, and this is something that we've worked on as well, the big challenge is that we have 600 million people not having access to energy. The biggest challenge being actually the cost of distributing through the grid. And sometimes also population density is a big challenge, because the cost of the grid is so high to bring the electricity to small villages and all of that. Although it is a right to access energy, but also sometimes the economics don't work. So basically what some of the DFIs have done, working with philanthropic organizations, namely the Rockefeller Foundation and others, and I will talk about the African Development Foundation, the African Development Bank, is looking at alternative approaches where the foundation invested in testing what was called decentralized power, working on developing mini grids that actually can be developed with a small investment, such as like $150,000. You develop a scheme that can distribute power for productive use to villages that are far away from the grid and in a radius of 2 kilometers, for instance, and give them reliable power. But today, the model was still not economically sustainable because of the cost of inputs and all of that. So supporting on the model of doing that actually really help reduce the cost and make the business case improve. Second, what the DFIs did to do that was also, there was no really funding for mini-grids on the market. It was seeding the Decentralized Energy Access Fund, which actually allows to invest into startups that are looking at this new approaches to distributed access to energy, either through mini-grids or solar home systems to help them develop and cover more people.
Okay. Rob, I'd suggest
Thank you.
You'd have a chance to speak directly with Mamadou later if you'd like in the breakouts. And I just threw on the screen, I'll back to you, Zach, in a second. We do plan to have an Africa-based deep dive. The topic, just for-profit and non-profit. So we'll welcome you that one as well. So back to you, Zach.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you a lot, Mamadou, for all the insights and the answers. We're gonna move on to Maurizio Tota, so that you could tell us a bit about Amazon work. Let's see. Can you hear us, Maurizio?
Maurizio.
I'm muting, sorry. It's always the same problem.
Welcome, Maurizio. Okay, awesome. Then let's hand it off to you.
Yeah, Maurizio, last I saw you, you had a COVID beard on, but now you're clean shaven.
Yeah, now I'm out of quarantine, thank goodness. So, Mark, thank you for having me. The whole thing is a bit improvised. I hope the presentation will be good enough. And I had to sort of slim it down from the usual half an hour that I'm talking about this topic. But I hope you like or you find interesting what you see. So,
can we go that first slide?
Go back one slide, please, because this is the second slide. Yes, exactly. So, what you see here is just a small sample on 1,000 square kilometers of what happened all over the Amazon in the last 40 years. So in total, about 800,000 square kilometers of mostly privately owned forests have been legally destroyed and burned down. So this mainly happens for financial reasons. Many Brazilians still see this as a way to provide desperately needed jobs and income to people. But as these forests are being destroyed for money, we thought the safest way to protect them is to show that it's possible to make more money by keeping the forests alive. So how do we get support for this alternative approach from people and politicians alike? By creating employment and income for the local population. So Mamadou was saying it is very important that these large-scale developments are actually sustainable. And the best way to make them sustainable is to make them financially sustainable. So you can see from the second slide, a forest can actually be protected by sustainable forestry. So what does forestry mean? The amount of tree harvesting is adapted to the growth of the forest, and the amount of CO2 permanently stored remains the same on average. So in short, we are cutting trees to protect the forest. As absurd that might seem, but this is the most efficient way of doing it. Because in an integrated sustainable operation like this one, the biggest possible positive impact to all parties involved is a win for the forest because it's protected in the long term, a win for the climate because it's drawing down and keeping CO2 sequestered, and a win for the people by creating durable employment, and last but not least, a win for the investor with a continuous initial return of 3 to 4% and a total IRR of more than 15% after 20 years. So as you see in my bio, I am a passionate impact investor and entrepreneur now, but for the last 30, 40 years, I've been specialized in large-scale projects. And so in the last 10 years, I've been applying this experience to impact investing. So this is something that works well. And I can compare the two because actually a few years ago in 2015, I bought what I thought was a large piece of land, 1,500 hectares. In acres, that should be something like close to 4,000 acres. No, 3,000 something acres. And so I was making some comparisons between how efficient as an impact investment the construction of a renewable energy solar power plant versus the protection and conservation of the Amazon forest is. And in order to be able to compare the two, I said, okay, for every $1 million invested, what are the effects? So in the Amazon, for $1 million invested, we can purchase enough forest that contains and keeps stored 1 million tons of CO2. That's quite a sizable amount. This forest will additionally extract about 9,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere every year, which are then stored in the wood that will be produced with what is harvested from the forest. And it will also prevent the emissions from cows grazing on that land from methane, which is equivalent to 80,000 tons per year. So over a period of 30 years, for every $1 million invested, you have about 3.6 million tons of CO2 not emitted. So this is a huge climate mitigation effect for a relatively small amount of money. And in order to see how efficient this is, if you invest, or for every $1 million invested in the solar power plant, which is a very efficient one, on my land in Portugal, so the same amount of money only saves about 18,000 tons of CO2 over a period of 30 years. So this climate mitigation effect, just by using and protecting nature, is much more efficient than using technology, even if I'm an engineer, I have to admit that. So the climate mitigation investment in forestry is about 200 times more efficient for the same amount of money invested. So if we give nature the space to produce in a natural way, that's the most efficient way of doing it. And an investor can make double-digit returns by doing this. So this confirms that although many people in the impact investment space or in the philanthropy space would like to do good and to do the right things, I think it's even more important to do the right things in the most efficient way possible, because any limited amount of money will go the farthest. So this idea of protecting the Amazon forest on a large scale is not only an idea, is not only theory, but we're already doing it, and it's already profitable. The problem is the Amazon is so huge that even with the amount of money that we invested, we're just protecting a small part of the Amazon. So I would be extremely happy if we found a few other investors, and actually we can find a lot of them because the Amazon is so big, and you can actually purchase a lot of private land and transform it in this way to be protected in the long term. And I may add, many people usually ask me, well, but isn't it better to leave the forest alone? Well, the problem is that the forest left alone is practically carbon neutral. So you avoid emitting all that forest that goes up in smoke if it's burned down to make space for cattle, but you actually don't draw down any carbon, like in a managed forest. And especially, this is true because you will not get the politicians, you will not get the local population to go along with it. They say, hey, we need to make a living. We need to make money. We need to survive. So only if you can produce wealth and income by using the forest in a sustainable way, you actually have a chance of protecting it in the long term. So I think you really have to see all the moving pieces.
Mhm.
And once you know everything, then you have a chance of really making a difference by finding a sustainable solution that can be sustainable in the long term because you have the backing of the local population. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance.
Maurizio, can you just give context? What's the size of the land that you own now? And I think you had said at an earlier meeting that it's much larger than
I use the term control because we own outright a certain amount of land, but we control about 1.1 million hectares, either by owning it outright with cadastre deeds and everything, or by having contracts by which we control that land. So that's quite already, so 1.1 million hectares, that's 2.7 million acres. And that's about the size of a quarter of Switzerland. So that's already a certain amount of money, but amount of land and amount of money invested. But unfortunately, it's just 0.25% of the size of the Amazon itself, because it's so enormously huge. And so we can accommodate any amount of investment to go on with us, and you get already double-digit returns without considering any future carbon credits, which we haven't tapped yet. So, and we get all that biodiversity protection for free, so to say, because the forest is protected and still has this enormous amount of different plants and animals that live in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Maurizio. So to sum it up, it's the same nutshell I got previously, which is this is a new way to be sustainable. It's more cost effective than the more popular ways people know about, like solar energy, for example. And it's actually better than leaving the forest to its own, right? So maybe for the benefit of time, we'll go to Nicole as the next speaker, and then at half of the hour we'll have breakouts. So if you guys have questions for Maurizio, we could take them then in the breakout around sustainability.
Thank you
Nicole,
very much.
over to you. Nicole also has some slides added.
Great, thanks so much, Zach. Do you have my slides, or would you like me to share them?
We have them in the...
I've got them. I was just letting people see your bio for the.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Nicole Verkeilen. I'm based out of the Pacific Northwest here in Seattle, Washington. And today I'm going to be discussing a nonprofit that I founded, a 501c3 nonprofit called Forest Stump. And once we get the slides up here, I'll kind of take you guys on a little bit of a journey on my own personal background and what kind of brought me to forming Forest Stump in the first place. And as a nonprofit, Forest Stump operates at the intersection of disability rights, healthcare, and sport. So if you go to the next slide. So that was a picture of me. You can see that I have a prosthesis. I lost my leg to bone cancer when I was 10 years old. I was diagnosed with a rare form of osteogenic sarcoma. And luckily, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up just outside of Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is, and was fortunate enough to have my care done at the Mayo Clinic. But despite that, I mean, I thank the Mayo Clinic for saving my life from cancer. But what really was an interesting transition was into that life of now having a disability and having to use a prosthesis. So if you click to the next slide, basically growing up, I was only provided one prosthesis to do everything. And it would change out, every 3 to 5 years as I would start to grow. But this one prosthesis was really just built for walking, light jogging. And as an active 10-year-old kid, I wanted to do much more than just walk. I wanted to play with my friends. I wanted to run. I wanted to be the athlete that I'd always been up until that point, playing soccer, playing softball, no matter what it was, I didn't want to have any limitations. But what I found growing up is that this one prosthesis would just break down constantly. I was constantly breaking the foot. I was constantly having to get that replaced. I was having to sit on the sidelines. And if you click to the next slide, And what my family and I were coming up against was just denial after denial from my insurance company. Basically, we tried to get me access to a waterproof prosthesis so that I could go in the water, play with my friends. And that was denied, saying that that's a convenience item to have access to a prosthesis that's waterproof. We also tried to get me access to what you've probably seen, a running blade or a prosthesis that would allow me to run and do sports. And that was also denied and considered to be not medically necessary. A third type, which I haven't necessarily had the challenge, but others have, is having access to something that might allow you to change your heel height, which is not just so that you can wear high heel shoes, it's actually very important. So any shoe that you change into, there's different socket pressures that end up happening in your prosthesis. But that's also denied and is considered to be a vanity item. And so even to this day, 18 plus years later, these policies are still in place where insurance can deny access to these types of devices, saying that, having something that's waterproof is a convenience, having something that allows you to be physically active is not medically necessary, and a host of other, denials that come about. And so if you click to the next slide, through this time, I really started to wonder, what is it really that makes me disabled? Is it the fact that I'm missing my leg? Or is it these outdated insurance policies that deny me access to an active life? I see people out there in the media who have access to things like these running blades, who are out there accomplishing some incredible goals, going on to the Paralympics. But, I was starting to wonder, why can't I have access to something like this? And I was going through the process at that point of running my first half marathon. And this was, a super cool goal of mine. I was, doing it with my friends, and I just kept, every step forward was 2 steps back. My prosthesis was constantly breaking. I was doing this all on just a walking leg. I ended up in physical therapy twice a week with a sacral torsion, pelvic asymmetry, basically back pain, that I had basically run my pelvis out of alignment. Just waking up in the morning, I would try to put my socks on, I'd be in tears. And, I was really pushing through that pain to try and, do what I wanted to do and to be active and to be healthy. And so I ended up going to my prosthetist and said, hey, this isn't working. Let's see if we can make a new type of prosthesis that will be covered by my insurance and allow me to be active. And so I went through the course of 26 appointments over the course of a year, each appointment 2 to 4 hours long. And after all of that, I ended up with the exact same prosthesis that I've had for the past 5 years. And that to me was just so incredibly frustrating. And that was really what was debilitating me, was not the fact that I was missing my leg, but that I just couldn't get access to what I needed to be a healthy person. And so click to the next slide. I decided I wanted to do something about that. And at that point, I was working in the sustainability environmental space, doing business development, marketing, fundraising. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to shift gears. I want to be a voice for change. I want to be an advocate for the disability community. And, what can I do to help? And so that's where I decided to do a 1,500-mile triathlon down the West Coast, and ended up calling that Forest Stump. So if you click to the next slide, I quit my job, started up an Instagram account, a very millennial approach to, trying to make change on this. And what I really wanted to show over the course of this 1,500-mile, 2-month journey, where I'd be swimming, biking, and running day after day, was that, I had the will, I had the endurance, I had the power, within me to make it those 1,500 miles. But really the question was whether or not my only prosthesis, my insurance mandated prosthesis, would be able to survive that journey. So if you click to the next slide. So here's kind of a picture of me jumping off the ferry into the bay right underneath the Golden Gate Bridge there, swimming in the ocean. And so what we ended up doing is creating a film from that 1,500-mile journey. It's called 1,500 Miles. It's an award-winning documentary short film. It's been in 12 plus film festivals, and you can actually find that and watch it on our website, foreststump.org, if you're so inclined. It's an incredible film of not only the journey that we took, but also, the real issue at hand in terms of not being able to access, what I needed to be able to be active and to live the life that I wanted. And I don't want to give away the ending, but the ending is somewhat an important piece in the fact that I came in contact with an organization called the Challenged Athletes Foundation. And to my surprise, they ended up donating and giving me my very first running blade. And so since then, my life has completely altered and changed by having access to that technology. It's something that I'd seen in the media, but I'd never really experienced it for myself to really know what that is capable of. But I can tell you, going through that process, getting that running blade made and then putting it on for the first time, it was just absolutely incredible, life-changing. Putting that prosthesis on, it really felt like I had my leg back. And it immediately shaved off 2 minutes per mile on my running time, which is, for any of you runners out there, how incredible that is to have that significant of a change. And that's kind of how much harder the right side of my body was working, just overcompensating for the fact that my walking prosthesis was not providing any return whatsoever. So if you click to the next slide, after receiving that, and then there's going to be a series of pictures here. After receiving that running blade, it really opened up a lot of doors for me and just a lot of opportunities. I ended up going to Washington, D.C., ended up spending and living there for 10 weeks, doing a healthcare policy fellowship, being able to meet with members of Congress. One of my great friends and idols, Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is an incredible disability champion for the disability community. I ended up partnering with a group of amputees and climbing Cotopaxi in Ecuador, a 19,000 plus foot volcano, which I never in a million years thought I'd be able to do. And I also ended up going and training with Team USA and winning the national championships for paratriathlon. So just an incredible amount of opportunities and experiences that I was opened up to just by gaining access to this technology and being able to be healthier and more independent. And throughout that process, what I realized was, I'm not the only one that's experiencing this. I'm not the only amputee. I'm not the only individual with a disability who's coming up against these incredible hurdles just to live out their daily life. And so what I wanted to do was really to figure out how I can position Forrest Stump to make the most impact. And so if you go to the next slide, I realized that no amputee, no individual with a disability should have to go to the length that I did. No one should have to do a 1,500-mile triathlon to prove that they're worthy of access to the assistive technology that they need to just live their life. And so what I found, within, going to DC, working with members of Congress, understanding the policy landscape at this point in time, and all the nonprofits that are out there, is that there's really not a convener of all of these, hundreds upon hundreds of nonprofits that are out there that are on the ground level, raising money to provide access and really charity to individuals with disabilities. And so what Forrest Stump does, and as an advocacy organization, comes at the intersection of charity and justice, and saying that, there's a root level issue here. This is needed for systems level change that within the disability community, within healthcare, that needs to happen. And kind of what Mamadou was saying earlier in terms of these, multi-stakeholder partnerships, that's something that Forrest Stump is working on in terms of building a coalition and an aligned action network to bring all of these organizations together to say, hey, we're all separately working on the same issue. And what that really is about this core level justice issue of not being able to access, for the disability community, the right to physical activity. So if you click to the next slide, and what I want to get across here is, it's not just about fancy technology in terms of a running blade or a sports wheelchair that has been really hyped up in the media and made to seem really bionic and a lot more advanced than what it really is. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, can I see your leg? I mean, it looks so bionic. And if I look at them like, this thing is so basic. I mean, when I sweat, it falls off. My ankle doesn't move whatsoever. I mean, it's extremely heavy. There's a long way for the technology to go before it really reaches that level of being bionic. And so what this really is about access to physical activity. And the fact that there's this lack of access is really a health disparity for the disability community. And I'm going to kind of take you through a series of just stats in terms of helping to understand the scale of this health disparity and what's really going on here. And these are all pictures of individuals I've met over the past few years, you know, within the disability community who are facing the exact same issue that I am. So if you click to the next slide, I mean, in terms of the numbers here, you know, many of you may not even know someone with a disability, but there's 21 million people just within the United States who are living with a physical disability, who are facing this challenge on a day-to-day basis. So this is a widespread issue that needs to be addressed. This isn't just myself. I mean, this is millions upon millions of people. And what I didn't mention earlier in terms of the cost of prosthetics or wheelchairs or orthotics is that it's extremely expensive and prohibitively expensive when not covered by insurance. So for myself, you know, a standard below knee prosthesis costs around $15,000. A running prosthesis can be anywhere between $10,000 to $25,000, depending on your level of amputation. And then you look at wheelchairs, that can be anywhere between $2,000 to $6,000, depending on what type of sports wheelchair it is. And even high activity orthotics can be anywhere between $3,000 to $10,000. So this is very expensive and out of reach for someone who's not able to have their insurance cover this. And it's really a discriminatory economic burden that this community is taking on, in the sense that insurance companies are very excited to sponsor 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, marathons, really put their money to say that, you know, running is good for you. We want everyone to get involved. We're going to sponsor this, you know, marathon, but yet for their policyholders who have a disability, they're not going to cover that. Also, if you look at things like ACL surgeries, which is one of the most common knee injuries in the country, you tear your ACL, you want to get back up and running, your insurance will cover that. That's between a $20,000 to $50,000 surgery. So, I mean, we're looking at the same level of cost, and there are millions of those that happen every year and cost over $500 million for the healthcare system. Am I running out of time?
Yes, Nicole, thank you for all that you've shared. We need to segue to the last speaker, but I'll say for the breakout, along with discussing the advocacy work you did with policy and whatnot, I think people might be interested to hear about the different technologies currently available. Maybe something is investable. Maybe sharing insights around those areas is good as well.
Definitely.
So, thank you. And we're going to switch to Charles.
Yeah, thanks. I'll share my screen if that's okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much. I'm sorry?
Go for it.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, you know, you did some updates to the slides, so use yours.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And thanks, Mark and Zach, for having me. I appreciate that. Nicole, it's nice to meet you. That was fantastic. And shout out to Minnesota. I'm from St. Paul, so we've got something in common. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And go in full presenter mode. So yeah, I'm Charles McDonald. I'm the founder and executive director of Community Engagement Partners. I'm going to get into that in just a moment, but there's a quick question that I have for you all to think about. You can even put your responses to this question in the chat box if you would, but just I challenge you to think back to, you know, maybe your earliest recollection when you were a kid, and you know, you think about a family member or a teacher. What do they tell you was the purpose of education? Again, just think about that for a second. And again, feel free to chat. I just think this is fascinating. I love hearing these types of responses, and maybe in the breakout we could talk a little bit about it. And I think about that question a lot. When I was a kid, you know, if you would ask my mom, what was Charles like when he was a kid? She would have said, oh, he was very inquisitive and he was very high energy. And she used to tell me that those two things would either get me in a lot of trouble, or they'd get me into a place where I was, I could do a lot of really great things. One thing in particular she'd tell me is that my inquisitive nature would do me well in college. And then she would go on these long diatribes about college this, college that. This is what college is going to be like. College is so great. It's so wonderful. She used to say this to my sister and my closest cousins, so much so that we actually would affectionately joke and call her the professor. The funny thing about that is that my mom actually never went to college. She didn't know much about college at all, but she instilled this belief that we were destined to go. And fast forward, I actually went to college, shock surprise, along with my sister and my cousins. We all went to the University of Minnesota. I was a poli-sci major, still an inquisitive student. And I remember a professor in a poli-sci class saying something to me that stuck with me for ever since. And that was, when you see significant disparities across different groups, or disparities in outcomes across different groups, it is likely a failure of political leadership and policy. And it just, this light bulb went off, and I thought about my experiences in college. I was, my poli-sci classes didn't get on campus. I was one of the only students who looked like me, and I was, and I would constantly searching for students who graduated from my public school district. And you know, this kind of this thought, this question, it triggered something in me, it catalyzed something in me about, well, if that is true, if what this professor said is true, then the inverse can be true as well. Then if we are to, if we can affect policy and politics for more equitable outcomes, well, then maybe we can transform the ways our systems work, in particular our education system. And I became passionate and fired up about that. It led me to California to do statewide grassroots coalition work to fundamentally change the student funding formula in California. It led me to Boston in an organization called Education Pioneers, where I was recruiting MBA students at MIT and Harvard, and convincing them to put their finance and tech skills to the benefit of society in the education sector. And it led me to South Carolina to lead statewide policy work for Teach for America South Carolina, and ensuring that state lawmakers were allocating millions of dollars to some of the poorest school districts in the country so that they could get access to diverse, talented leaders like Teach for America core members to teach in their small rural communities. And then it led me to an incredible fellowship opportunity with some of the nation's most impactful city-based funders who were focused on education systems change, and really helping them think through what would a more community-based, a community-driven approach to transforming education systems look like. And then here I am now, 2018, I was fortunate enough to launch Community Engagement Partners. And, you know, this is a little bit about us. I'm not going to read it for you, but you can see it here. But ultimately what we believe we are is, and what we do is, we are a bridge between well-intentioned, aspirational funders who want to transform education systems and the intended beneficiaries of their work. And we believe that when you build powerful partnerships between those two groups, anything can happen. I'm going to talk about this very briefly. I don't want to bore you all with this, but this is really, you know, education by the numbers. As we can see here, a few things I'll just point out. We spend about $770 billion in public education across local, state, and federal government. And then you can see some of these proficiency outcomes that we have across our public education system. It's a question I have for you all is, if you were running a business that had a $770 billion budget, but you were only getting to 30 to 40% of your goals annually, what would the likely outcome be for you in your position? It's not a rhetorical question. I'd love to hear that in the chat, but just something to stew on for a second. And so why should we care? Well, there's a number of reasons why we should care about how our young people are faring in our public education system. It has real implications. The quality of education has real implications on social and economic mobility. We know that there's a real strain on public services when we have an undereducated and uneducated population. Critical thinking and cooperation are just such important skills and characteristics to have if you want to have a functional democracy. We're understanding fact from fiction, and we're not engaging in harmful conflict. And then certainly civic engagement is so critical. The higher education, the more likely you're going to be involved in the democratic process, in particular, the higher rates of voting. And so this is an oversimplification of the past 20 years of public education reform. I'll spare you the dissertation, but there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm and focus over the last 20 years of folks who really wanted to see radical systems change affecting policy and politics. And the 90s to the early aughts was really what we call the innovation phase, where we're seeing a lot of talented leaders who are opening up their own kind of high quality charter schools. We call them gap busting or gap closing schools. We're seeing a lot of in-district innovations happen. New York City comes to mind. And then we're seeing the emergence of alternative education pipelines like Teach for America. The second phase that we're kind of coming out of right now is this growth phase where we're saying, you know what, we know what works, or at least we have an inkling of an understanding of what works. We want to scale. We're going to grow our talent pipelines. We're going to replicate high quality schools, and we're going to do that with urgency and efficiency. Now we're in this phase, which is interesting, when we call it kind of inclusive innovation. So we're learning the lessons from the past, 15, 20-ish years, and saying, look, there may be a different way to do this that can actually lead to much more sustainable outcomes. And it can do less harm to communities, because there's been some resistance and backlash and some, and quite honestly, some tension on the ground. So what's worked? Well, I think another oversimplification, but when we think about what's worked at scale across cities during this kind of reform period, there's four things that we can kind of look to. So the first being that if we have really supportive policies that can really bust up in many ways the kind of antiquated, outdated way that we deliver education in communities through increased autonomy for educators and school leaders, smaller central offices so that folks can be focused on really steering and ensuring accountability of schools and school operators and educators, and ensuring that equity is met in terms of transportation and special education, then it's going to really free up educators and school leaders to do what they're best, what they were designed to do, and that's meet the needs of our children and prepare them for the next step in life. The next thing is high quality schools. So incubating, scaling, and replicating high quality autonomous schools has really worked. We've seen those schools do really amazing things in low income communities and communities of color. And also holding schools accountable that are not meeting proficiency and growth standards that we know are so important to further life outcomes for young people. Developing diverse talent pipelines to school leadership and to the classroom also has worked. And then at the school level, ensuring that our curriculum is rigorous and it's relevant, and that there's assessments that are meaningful, are also some things that have worked. So where has this worked? Well, we can and a lot of this stuff is debatable, but when we think about the numbers and what's happened in terms of scale and at a systems level, some of the things that happened in New Orleans are quite remarkable. You see the graduation rate skyrocket, and college entries up by 24 points since 2005, around the time Hurricane Katrina hit. And another city that has completely transformed their education system for low-income students and students of color is Denver. And they've taken this approach to reform, and they've seen some really remarkable things. Enrollment rates have gone up, and so have graduation rates. When you think about this type of reform in what we would call like mature reform cities, These are just some of the outcomes that I think are really positive. So you might be asking yourself, well, if you see all these things and they look so great, why haven't we seen this at scale? Well, there's a number of things that we can point to in these early stages of reform that have limited our impact to make more progress. Didn't paint a compelling enough vision. We did to educators, families, and communities, and not with them. We were very narrowly focused, rightfully so, on literacy and numeracy, but failed to address social and emotional needs of students. And then last but not least, we didn't focus enough on bold innovations. We didn't focus enough on rural and suburban education. And then thinking about the impact of poverty and what that role that plays on systems and school level education. I'll skip here. So taking all those lessons, this is where community engagement partners really comes in. And so what we do is this is our theory of change. And what we believe is that when we take aligned community partners and we center the values and the needs of those most impacted by educational inequity, and we take an ecosystem approach to systems change, we can dramatically transform the quality of education for all students. So everything I just talked about what works, but really making sure that we're doing that with our communities. And there's a formula for doing that. There's best practice for doing that. And it's quite amazing how little over the last 20 years we've invested in what we would call the demand side of educational equity. We've invested over 98% of our resources from a philanthropic standpoint in supply side, less than 2% in demand. Just think about that for a second. So why is this approach important? I'm going to talk about that in the breakout, but I want to go forward a little bit. But there's a lot of evident research base around why this approach, this engagement approach and centering values and needs of stakeholders is so critical and so important. Again, number of research, the research just keeps mounting, in particular in the face of COVID-19 and the impact that that's had on parents and families in our most struggling school system. Now more than ever is this time for us to really deeply engage and start educating around how we can transform systems to really respond in this moment. So this is how we do it. Our approach is pretty simple. We advise grass tops leaders and education funders. We convene networks of practitioners who really want to take a systems changed approach, but do that in a community-centered way. And then we create original tools and resources. We write about the work, we innovate to make sure we're building the field. Here are some of our partners, and this is probably where I'll stop, Zach, so that I can make sure we get time in the breakout rooms, but this is a partner snapshot. So I'm based out of Columbus, Ohio, but my organization is national. Some of our biggest partners that we work side by side with, I'll just highlight two of them. The first is the City Fund. This is a new fund that was created by Reed Hastings of Netflix and John Arnold of the Arnold Foundation. And their role is to really focus on investing a considerable amount of money in city-based reform, which transform education systems in a similar approach to what we do. And we really advise them and focus and support them on the engagement and advocacy side of the work. And developing that next generation of leaders who are going to lead in a different way to enact change that's more sustainable. And then lastly is the Walton Family Foundation. We have an exciting announcement that we're going to be making, and I'll share a little bit more about in the breakout, about an innovative approach that they're taking to education systems change, and they've partnered with my organization to help them do, I suppose, the kind of the R&D pilot of this approach. So super excited about the work that we have ahead, yeah, I would
awesome.
love an opportunity to connect with folks and share more.
Okay, thank you, Charles. So how we're going to move ahead, we're going to have 5 minutes for Q&A for Charles or for Nicole, and then we'll jump into breakouts for 15 minutes, just the updated, I guess, agenda. So if anyone have any questions.
So Zach, you notice that Charles is from Columbus, or in Columbus, and Nicole went to Ann Arbor. So just saying.
I have a question for Charles. This is Sarah Churridge. Charles, do you ever work with appreciative inquiry summits for community engagement?
I don't, but I would love to get connected if you are opening a door for me.
You've just met the ultimate door opener connector. So.
We'll talk. We'll talk.
Awesome. That's great.
Thoughts, questions, people? Quiet crowd. I think very inspiring from lots of directions. Zach, I know that we wanted to do some breakouts, which we can physically or technically do. We typically then come back one more time as a group. So what I can do, well, maybe you ask another question, so I can then initiate some breakouts. I'll just call it Nicole, Charles, keep me, Maurizio, and I hope our first speaker, is he still on?
Amadou had to jump off. No, so we just have 3. Yeah, so education and with Nicole and with Maurizio.
Okay. One moment. One thing I can do is do this very quick and create breakout rooms where I can create 3 rooms where you can move around. And I don't know if I set it up so you can move around, but in the interest of time, let's do that. If for some reason Charles and Nicole or Maurizio, if you're in the same room, come back, I'll move you. I think this is the fastest way to get going. And then from there, if you're not in the room for the person you want, just come back to the main room. We'll shift you around. Unless I got lucky and you have the ability to move. Okay. Does that work? That way we get moving. All right. So
okay, that's good.
And then we'll close them out, like 15 minutes. This is just to get going, get the initial questions. This is just a catalytic event. So see you back here soon.
lots of stories of people that started working for us that were desperate. They couldn't find a job. But let's say we can get the most bang for our bucks, if I may use that American expression, because the land down there is so incredibly cheap, and there are quite a few jobs to go around. So whatever we do, creating jobs and protecting the forest, we can actually do a lot of good with very little amount of, relatively little amount of money.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's something that we see in the development space where it costs us $12 for an unbelievable front-end developer when in a certain country, when it would normally cost us $175 for that same person domestically. So I definitely understand. But anyway, I didn't want to hog the conversation. Hi, Chris. Hi, Mark.
Hey, guys.
Kevin. Mark Jarvis. Hey.
No, I think Mauricio, it was a great presentation. Thank you. And I did a little bit of work for something called Plastic Oceans, which is a UK-based thing. Obviously, the title gives it away what it's trying to do. And trying to actually raise money and getting people to buy in and provide, let's say, philanthropic support to it. It's incredibly difficult, isn't it? It's a banging your head against the wall constantly when people do things.
Well,
Nobody wants to.
And Mark, what's different about what Maurizio has is it's really a business with with downside protection. It's because you're buying actual assets, and all the rest, and it's what. And yes, we could bring it through the front door and try to raise money for you, Maurizio, but there's also sort of this side door through philanthropy that might pique interest. And we're trying to figure out ways to shine lights based on people's particular social development goals, their interests. For MJ, maybe mental health, which is touching everything these days. Or it could be from the geographic point, or whether it's climate change or the rest. And so we're just trying to figure out ways to do things more systematically. Mark Jarvis, you were asking about and effectively shareholder rights type issues, but I think there's ways that we can do more here. So that's part of what we're trying to catalyze. Maybe we don't have to go into the specifics today. It's just maybe people know of other models.
It's all ready to go on the app as soon as we finish this meeting. Pre-written it.
You're now in charge of my app. You're my community manager now, Mark.
I'd like to be in a certain way. I'd like to do good, but I'd like to appeal to any kind of investor. So even the climate change deniers who would say, who cares? I don't care if I can sequester so many tons of carbon or a million tons of carbon. I'd say, okay, just care about the bottom line. You can have uncorrelated double-digit returns. So the positive thing about this is it can appeal both to the idealistic approach by saying, invest in this, you protect the forest, and you have money to protect even more forest later on, or just put a bit.
Chris and I have talked a lot. She told me all good things about you, so we'll be connecting.
So thank you so much. It's really great to meet you. She shared.
Should I move Chris over here?
Let's keep it moving.
Should I move Chris over here by chance? I was in the room with her. She's gonna wonder where did I go?
Joe, James, either one of you want to unmute yourself and make an intro and share a little bit about why you're in?
Here she is.
I was talking, like, they were like, Chris, and I was like, hey, I don't really have a question, but I'm here, and I'm glad you guys are here, and then I was zoomed out.
I just zapped her over here. I just realized you're a connector of sorts, or that's good with Sarah and Charles.
Yeah, I feel like I'm bookend between two people I love and respect, and feel so humbled to be in the middle of this. You're way too kind.
So, and I see Bill, but Joe I know is very passionate about these subjects, but I don't see, we must be offline. And the thing is, I'm heading to Ohio. My parents are in, there's Joe. I'm heading to Columbus area, Chris, today to see my parents. And I went to Michigan, so the Columbus, Michigan thing. In fact, Joe will make fun of me. He'll wonder if there's really a football team this year or something, but he's a Buckeye. And then Jim Filipkowski is like ever intellectually curious. I don't know what he thinks about your issues, but Joe, you want to say something maybe? Contribute?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep. I hear a dog too.
I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service for 20 years and developed social marketing campaigns to empower people to improve their relationship with the environment. And we're dealing with a lot of very complex environmental issues. They're not environmental issues for vacuum. They're, because you have obviously climate change is redefining our worldview, but some of the, you talk about water, we tested the fish in the Potomac River. 85% of the male bass have eggs. Let that sink in for a second. 85% of the male bass have eggs. That's crazy. And this is what we're doing. We're using this water. I mean, it's unbelievable what we're doing to the environment. So bottom line is, yeah, obviously education is a huge part of it. And what I'd like to see is focused on real world issues, not just reading, writing, arithmetic. Focus on leadership, focused on entrepreneurship, focus on those types of issues. Hopefully, we can make that happen. And with the efforts to deal with the systemic changes in education, it's going to be hard. There are a lot of people who are like, I did it. Why can't they do it too? I mean, it's incredible. So that's what I got.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that because we use the groundwater metaphor when we talk about systems change, in particular, to really get folks to focus on the idea of, look, it's not about. We say shorthand is.
And encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because my question, do you see a big window or potential in a Biden administration if we have an election that has a change in, will there be more resources available in your estimate?
Yeah, definitely there will be. We're already in communication with some of the Biden team in terms of their disability group, and I think there could be a huge opportunity for the disability community that has not really been present, unfortunately. And especially with maybe a refocus and a new piece of legislation on Medicare, there could be something that gets looped up with that.
Look, I think you presented it, but if I'm saying something you already said, forgive me, but I would encourage you to speak the language that some of these people use, which is return on investment. Mm-hmm. And that the ability to unlock the potential, people like yourselves and others who need this boost, that they become much more productive workers, members of communities, contributors, there's tax revenues, there's money that's saved when these people are able to go out and become independent. And there's all kinds of negative externalities that I'm sure are avoided. So some people are looking at return on investment for government programs. And I think your tools and your resources are helping people become independent and productive. And so it just strikes me that this is going to continue to grow because of efforts of people like you.
Definitely, I appreciate the feedback. And there's definitely research to support that in terms of access to sport and especially for the disability population being one of the highest unemployed minority groups.
Obesity.
Yeah, obesity, exactly. Thank you, I appreciate that.
There's another member of our community, Rob Frankfurt, who is raising a venture fund called the Living Fund. And I can connect you. But Rob's thesis is funding programs and tools and information because he got involved in this because he became aware of what a chronic illness, obesity, creates. And so if you look up Living Fund, or The Living Fund, you'll find a kindred spirit. He's a good friend, and he's a member of this community.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for that. I would love to connect with Rob.
Nicole, nice to meet you, and go blue. Can I share my screen? I want to introduce you to somebody that shares some of your passion. I went to Denison as well. So he's a Denison grad. If you see George Pierce on your screen. So he created, I want to say he got really badly injured. He was a national triathlete on the US team. And by coming back, he invented this shoe, which is laceless. It makes it really easy to put your shoes on for kids, for autistic people, for seniors. And it cut down his time. So it's also for the professional athlete. So if nothing else, you're sort of in the same general area. He's up in Bend. And, you know, he's got all kinds of activity that I'm not really finding it right here, but really, really interesting guy.
Yeah, right in this area. That's awesome.
Obviously, it's not prosthetics, but it's he would probably, you might have some spiritual cousins at least.
Yeah, definitely.
Different companies and software, then maybe their impact should be prosthetic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There is actually a footwear manufacturer out of Boston called OOFOS, and they design therapeutic slide flip flops and sure-fitting options for people of all ages who want to stay active and secure and that need therapeutic reinforcements. I can, you know, deeply identify with this discussion as I have a younger sister who lives a disabled life and has had a long spectrum of at least 2 decades of physical and other challenges that are interconnected. And you talk a lot about sport and athlete. I'm curious, to your point, Mark, about the therapeutic sneakers, which are easier to get on. Is this the type of approach which is being targeted towards different audiences, even such as, you know, the aging population as well? Or are you focused on those who are athletically minded already? Because I'm thinking there's a lot of implications even with social and emotional progress and learning that really
Tino,
relate with discussions.
you want to join we're doing breakouts.
Yeah, maybe a Michigan room.
It's not Michigan, it's about philanthropies. One philanthropy is about a Michigan woman, actually, who amputee athlete.
Yeah, I saw that.
Do you want to join that one?
Sure.
All right.
Thanks. How are you doing?
Good, you?
I'm well.
White books in the background. Is that your real background?
No, it's a curtain.
Okay.
Really, it's just lacking expectation in general for the disability community to be active. And I think part of it is challenging our assumptions, challenging the norms of what the disability community can do, and then really providing the resources, saying like, you know, okay, if I am an individual in a wheelchair or use a wheelchair, how do I go to the gym and utilize this equipment that may or may not be designed for something like myself, and having those adaptive type programs. I think it's really cool, although different from the Paralympics, it would be the kind of Special Olympics, but there's an individual, Chris, Nikic, and he has Down syndrome, but he's working to be one of the first complete Ironman, which is just absolutely amazing. And I'm really fun to follow his journey, but it's that kind of thing where, you know, what about his story is surprising to people? Why wouldn't we think that someone like him can complete an Ironman? Why wouldn't we promote that he tried to do that? So yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of the social emotional connection and really providing a much broader access to assistive technologies and just in general the resources needed to be physically active.
Gino, you want to?
I think a lot of it comes down to the mindset also, and in you know, even negotiating with various medical and health professionals on behalf of and advocating for my sister's care. It's complicated, and if there can be that that intervention educator who can provide the appropriate support, the therapy would be probably adopted earlier and better, and help to avoid a lot of
Leslie, can I just interrupt just for a second?
expenses in the system.
Leslie, sorry to interrupt. We're going to sort of come back together before we lose everybody. And Tina wants to say something. And I'm looking at Rich, and I'm thinking of a friend of ours. You know Mike Ross? He got, you know, he was living the life of Riley, sold a company, went to Colorado, was in the worst ski accident, and he just tried to repairing his body. He had to create a machine that provided both, you know, the cold compression and then the heat. And I don't know where. I think he's now moving into industrial production. But it's another person that you might identify with. Nicole, go. Tino, go ahead. Another fellow Michigan alum.
I identify with many of those struggles because I'm an amputee myself from there. And so the cost structure of all of those prosthetics, is it regulatory or is it something else?
It's interesting how that happens.
And have you tried Heineken 00?
No, I won't touch it. I won't touch anything I won't touch any non-alcoholic beer, whiskey, rum, whatever, because that will be, you know, that's something that is too dangerous for me. But brands like Diageo that owns Kettle One and Johnny Walker and all these, Ciroc, you name it, they bought Seedlip. And different kombucha brands and, you know, that type of stuff. If it doesn't taste like whiskey, you know, and it tastes like an actual mocktail, I'm all for it. But if someone's trying to sell me on a non-alcoholic whiskey, before you know it, I'm going to be drinking whiskey. And Heineken 00 wanted to partner with us with iHeartRadio, but it was just something that I just couldn't come to terms with. You know,
it is one of the best tasting non-alcoholic beers. When I was young and, you know, driving home at the end of an evening, we'd have this Klaushaller stuff from Germany, and it was terrible. But the Heineken 00, I mean, it tastes like beer. I mean, it's great.
That's my problem. The problem is if it tastes like beer, that then I'm going to quickly switch to beer, and then before you know it, all bets are off.
But Seedlip's good too, right? Seedlip's very clever.
Yeah, they are teetering on the gin component. But Diageo put a big investment into seed lab.
MJ, we've talked about my friend James Fry, who wrote the book, A Million Little Pieces. And,
Yeah.
and you know, it was a little bit glorified because, was it, oh goodness, Oprah put him on the spot. And we have 30 seconds. But you got to meet him. We got to figure out the way to do it. You need to read a little bit of the book. There's one part where he gets out of rehab, and his buddies, they go to a bar and they play a pool, and he orders a triple scotch. And he puts his nose deep into the full, into the highball, takes the biggest, this is going to be glorified. And because he knew he would be over if he could get through that moment.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
and he doesn't believe in any Christian laden. I'm not even sure the 12 steps, because I think there's some pieces to that. But he's just a maverick kind of guy. You got to meet. Well, look, we're going to try to bring everybody back, so I'm going to close the rooms, and you can come back sooner than if you want. Hello, Rich.
How are things?
Good. Heading to Ohio today, believe it or not, see my parents.
Driving or flying?
I've got this Delta flight that gives you the ability to cancel, so we're not sure. And it's only me. If it was me and my wife, I'd easily go car, but we'll see.
Yeah, flying's not so bad.
Let's take all the precautions.
Hey, Rich, nice to see you.
Hey, Mark, good to see you, buddy.
Oh, yes. I forgot all the Moscow connections.
Non-alcoholic vodka.
There was life before Fleming's, before E&Y.
E&Y, exactly.
They burned those files.
And Rich, have you ever met Maurizio?
I don't think so. Hi, Maurizio.
You should. He's the one that is buying pieces of the Amazon forest with a business plan. Creating forestry, husbanding the area, buying cheap, emerging market. And he's putting his money where his mouth is. He basically matches the investors as they do that.
So the interesting thing is not only you buy the land cheap, because about $200 an acre, that's quite cheap for any kind of forest, but it's incredibly cheap when you think about the carbon value. I mean, carbon prices are anywhere between $20 and $100, depending on where in the world and how you calculate it. But there you can buy carbon stored in trees for about $1 per ton. So that's quite a good value, in my view.
So look, maybe we could definitely talk about specifics of the Amazon, of amputee athletes, of Charles' themes with community engagement, or what partnering with Visa will be going forward. But I'd like to just ask people just general advice, like how does a platform like ours that's focused mainly on investing, so easily I can get behind Maurizio, I can onboard him and due diligence him, and we talk about ROI for nonprofits, but I can definitely come to a view, and then we could scale those managers, right? Or scale those businesses. I also can see how our collaborative network could just like we're doing these breakouts, we're just making connections. But I think we could do more and better. So and we have a few other things up our sleeve, but just curious what people's reactions are. Anybody?
Kino, I think, wants to speak.
Yeah, so my startup,
Oh, that was Joe. Keep going. Go.
Yeah, so my company, we're using sustainability as a marketing tool. However, it's real in the sense that we're a supply chain solution that's taken global supply chain and collapsed it down to a hometown process. So we eliminate the effect of our environmental impact with the planting of 3 trees, which costs us $3. And so we do that. We replenish the wood we use, we offset the electricity generation, CO2, and the local delivery fuel. And assuming what we produce lasts 3 years, which is a conservative assumption. And so
I take that point. I was asking more of a conceptual, not specific to any. How does a platform like ours?
I think there needs to be a context switch with regard to the way that investors look at, at acquisitions or investment. And what I mean by that is when you look at social impact, one of the things that investors will find out is that entrepreneurs that fall within the social impact space will go to the end of the world to achieve their goals, because there's a pull, there's a tug that they have beyond the pocketbook or the wallet. And so I think that now that we're in the middle of COVID, but as we come out of COVID, I think that we need to really, really look at social impact, because the pain points that exist, if you look at social impact entrepreneurs, I know the tenacity behind them, because there's a reason why they are doing what they are doing.
Sure. You're both right, and you're both sort of talking your books, because you're tenacious and you're doing all those things. I guess at some point I'm looking for some help, so I can help others like you on the philanthropic front, not just.
May I offer my sort of idea? I think the real thing that you could contribute in helping is by creating an information platform. What I realized is that many intelligent entrepreneurs, managers, directors of companies or other people, they don't yet know that with impact investing, you can do good and still make money. So many times, I think it's not only in the US, but also in Europe, people are still stuck with that mentality. You're either a robber baron or you're a philanthropist, sort of the first or the second half of Carnegie, Rockefeller, etc., if you're very successful. So the interesting thing would be just to offer scalable, profitable opportunities to people. Just offer them information. This is possible. You can do good while making money. So expose people to this possibility.
I agree, Maurizio. I think as a quick reflection of this current event, so our focus before was to showcase problem areas, right? So for example, in education or any other space, you're showing the problem areas. But I think given the financial orientation of the group and everyone's thinking of investments and whatnot, we could also highlight certain, investment themes similar to how you were doing with managing the forest that are like under the impact investment side as well. Like similar with Nicole's breakout, for example, the discussion went around, future technologies, what's the DoD investing in, what are potential options there. So, she highlighted already the problems faced with amputees, like what are possible solutions. And I think solutions related to investment are what people are interested in the group.
Yeah, I'd like to also share something that I spent the week at the SOCAP. They had their virtual conference, and that's all about social impact investing. And I was there for the week. And I really would love to see a metric that takes into account heart rate of return as well as a currency rate of return. I know there are a lot of, people, and Gary Bowles always talks about the spectrum, that there are people who are willing to, believe it or not, make an impact socially over maybe making some money. And not that they don't make any money, but maybe they're not going to make as much as they would in a different kind of fund that's not a social impact fund. So I think it would be time, and we're about at a time where we can start thinking of what would a heart rate of return in terms of an investment metric look like.
I think Sarah's 100% on the money. Because what is the rate of return on a human life?
Yeah.
And I was in the breakout room, we were discussing, from speaking to social impact investors, I've seen them looking at rates of return that they're looking at 3 to 5%, whereas VCs could look at 10 to 30x compared to 3 to 5x. They're trying to do something that has a return and that they serve a greater good and leave the world a better place. So what is the return on saving a human life?
Yeah.
And I think that we are not looking at that variable. And so I think the most important thing is for people to understand, and that's why it's so important, what Zach did today, for people, and Mauricio and the whole crew, for people to understand the suffering that exists. So people stop just thinking with their pocketbooks and wallets and actually look at what is the rate of return of saving someone from death or whatever it may be. The last thing I'll say is I have a friend that created something called the Lucy Light that a lot of you people would probably benefit off of, which is the company is Empowered. And they supply an inflatable solar powered light to countries off the grid. And so for education, Charles, for kids that are off the grid that can't read, you turn it over and it powers. And at night, the kids in Africa, they could read, and in these countries that are off the grid. He saw this need because he was on a trip. He turned it into a company, and now John has a very profitable company, and it's a B certified social impact company. Perfect example of taking a pain point and then turning it into something that's profitable and saving lives at the same time.
Well, Sarah, if I may say something adding to this, the most important thing is that we need patient capital, because we get the 3 to 4% return as of now, but we get an IRR of more than 15% from the beginning if you are invested for 15 years. And when it comes for the hard rate of return, I don't know how much you value the 400 people that already work in our companies, or if you multiply that by 4, the 1,600 people that are their families profiting from it, or I don't know, the amounts of forests, plants, and animals that are still alive because we did this. So being an engineer, the difficult thing is always to find the correct metric. How many animals' life is a human life worth? Insurance companies will give you a price of everything. But we just have to bring on the investors, because if we don't have the money, we can't do anything good. And if you give the investors a decent return, then all the other collateral effects, which are very good, start to happen.
There's a lot of these problems stem from a tragedy of the commons type of framework, right? Where it's a beggar thy neighbor type of, unfeathered capitalism. And so, Bill Deutschler and I were talking about the need or the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility of money managers. And there's, I mean, we're trying to internalize the externalities of harmful behavior. And if we can figure out that formula, Mark.
Yep. Well, I guess I'm
question.
Go ahead.
I will, I don't know who I could share this with, but there's a fascinating study done by a woman named Erica Chenoweth at the University of Denver. And she did some research on nonviolent resistance to authoritarian rule or dictatorships. And she hypothesizes that if you, in order to overthrow an unruly government, you actually need, I think it's less than 3% of the total population to mobilize in collective action. And I think that so we've been studying that in kind of our work, because I think there's some real interest in folks who are very, return on investment heavy around like, well, what are some hypotheses we can take around what might catalyze real transformational change in terms of, collective impact, if you will. So anyways, it's a fascinating read. I think it just triggered something for me in this conversation. You all are very, very fascinating people.
You put it in the chat? The name of the...
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
The other thing I just want to say with all of this is another area when it comes to philanthropy and community involvement is looking at intergenerational dialogue and intergenerational activities.
So again,
I'm happy you mentioned this. I'm happy you mentioned this because impact investing is actually one of the best way to involve the next gens. You have quite a lot of young people who all of a sudden realize with guilt, shame, and what have you, that they are coming into a huge amount of money. And sometimes they even have a reaction like, I don't want any of this. And the interesting thing is if you are involved in impact investing, even better than philanthropy, because philanthropy is just by having the money and then giving it away. Impact investing is showing that money is actually a tool for good. You can use the money to make something good while you're doing some investing. And you're providing a safe haven for the environment, you're providing jobs, you're doing something good. So this is, I think, the best way how to involve the next gens who will be coming into a huge amount of money within the next years. And to have them responsibly act instead of just going down the streets on Fridays for Future like they do in Europe, involve all those next gens that actually have the money and have the means, or will have the money and have the means of doing something with that money for the planet, for the future.
I guess I still come back. I'm just trying to find what's our best way for our platform to operate. So we have these groups, and yes, we have Impact Next Gen. And we have this survey which people are filling out. So my natural tendency is to allow people to form groups around around these clusters, these themes. And yes, there are ancillary aspects to them. People can sort of self-tag and and connect. We can definitely do more events like this. Sarah and I are planning one. We're also planning on, 361 Foundation, and they even almost like in a similar sense diligence some of these philanthropies but a lot of it's just teaming up. There are a lot of smart families that are doing this in very systematic ways.
Mark, if I may interrupt you, and please forgive me.
Please.
I think the key here is you have all these people interested in this, and this they can do with philanthropy and whatever. Then you have all your usual biotope towards investing and themed investing. But the real clincher, the real connection is between impact investing, where you address those themes, but try to find way how to make money by addressing those themes. And this would be something where you could really make a difference, because you can get on board all these people who have some. I'm always appalled by how much disconnect there is between, oh yes, I care about the environment, yeah, but in my company, I need to make money, you know? But why don't you make money while caring for the environment? Why don't you save money by using up less energy by doing an energy audit in your company, so you're doing something for the climate? So there are so many things that can be done, which many people still perceive it's either this or that. And actually, by putting the two together, you can make it work in a profitable way.
Hey, Mark, what about expanding the 361 platform and with regard to impact investing? And what I mean by that is take the people here and ask them if they know 5 or 6 impact, investors or firms, and bring them onto the 361 platform. So that way, because everybody has different needs, whether it's environment, addiction, or whatever it is, and really try to have a robust impact investing community on 361 and kind of expand the 361 platform.
Yeah, I guess I totally agree. We're moving in that direction. I just see there's another level of the chessboard at philanthropy. There's sort of investing, and then there's impact, and then there's philanthropy. And I'm just trying to connect some of those dots. You take someone like Torin Kutnick, right? You've met Torin. Torin goes the whole gamut. They give grants, they make investments that they try to make impactful, and they'll even provide like PRI and in between. And some people have a stronger, lesser, lens. But if you know their passions, I can just, if I knew everybody's, if people are, take Nicole, sports, someone who's just appreciates that story that she's had, they could relate to her. I don't know. She doesn't have, I'm just learning today. I don't know what it is you have, but then at the same time, we have to make sure that she's got something that's viable. We all have to sort of vet it a bit, right? And then, it's sort of what we would do with the investment world, but just applying it a bit more. I don't mind connecting anyone to anybody who's trying to do good, but if we're trying to help people scale, we should do some vetting. And I'm just trying to provide some discipline and connections.
And Sarah just mentioned DAFs.
My screen. May I share my screen?
Yeah, of course.
Show you something.
Sure.
So this is the whole impact sustainable investment spectrum. As you go from traditional investment, the guys that have been in our breakout room, please forgive me for showing this again. But you go from traditional investment, no impact, to just exclusion. You don't do alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and whatever. Then you go to ESG integration. Then you go to thematic and impact investment. And you can see you achieve different steps of impact or influence with your investment. And actually, and here you have philanthropy. There you just give the money, you don't have any returns apart from social or heart rate returns, how they were called. So I think by considering all this, and I'm passionate about this graph because I've been in impact investing for 10 years, and only last week I was at the talk of Credit Suisse where I saw this. This, I think, is a very good summary that can show you that here with impact investing, you still are delivering financial returns, but you're pursuing environmental, social, and governance opportunity and focusing on measurable high impact solutions. So the red space, which I marked here, that's where I want to focus. But of course, here you can do even more good on those kind of things where you don't get any returns and where it's still necessary that we have passionate people going there.
This is a great graph. What I'm saying is let's emphasize that right side a bit, because when you know that someone has a passion project, and that means they probably could add value to your impact, and they feel even better that they can do both. So I'm just trying to bring that dimension to the fore, and then I think we can triage in a better way.
But Mark, there is
I'd
no
like to add something.
There is no contrast. It just different. You saw in the graph it's just a sliding scale, and the more you go to the right, the more you're into doing good. And after a certain point, if you really want to do good, you don't have any returns. But not everybody can afford that.
Right.
I want to add something to your graph, Maurizio. What you mentioned about patient capital, what I've seen is sometimes patient capital ends up being philanthropic, right? Because some R&D investments, for example, you don't know when their return is gonna be, basically, so you can't really model it. So it ends up being like a grant into a certain R&D area that might have a breakthrough within reasonable or unreasonable financial timelines. So that's like what I've seen happen.
Like Manus, exactly, right? The Gates Foundation gave Manus those grants to prioritize the research on the malaria curing molecule.
Yeah, the malaria molecule. So I definitely see that happening, like the patient capital going there, sort of. And it's because investment has been, relatively shorter time scale, right? You're always looking within 5 years, for example, like for an ROI. You're not looking like beyond 10 years or 15, 20 years.
In my forestry investment, I've always looked at the IRR, because with forestry, you have to wait until the trees grow. And even if I'm blessed in South America that the trees grow within 10, 20 years. Back in Europe, they take about 100 years. So we'd never see them mature. So it's already nice that they grow faster in South America.
But if you look at venture philanthropy or DAFs, right, there's a complete connection between impact and philanthropy. And so I would look at it that way too, because philanthropy and impact are very close when you're dealing with venture philanthropy or DAFs. And with DAFs, they're not looking for those short, quick hits back. So I think that's something that really needs to be, focused on.
I'm in favor of everything that achieves good. I just want to point out that in order to educate the next gens, in order to get as many people on board by showing that money can be a force for good. We're always talking about how much money is concentrated in just a few hands, but these hands are not always the same. It's always the younger ones that take on the next generation. So it would be important to show them what good they are able to do with this. Have the cake and eat it. They can do good and still get some returns. Because getting somebody who has been trained, well, you have to make a return just to give the money away, that's a different bucket.
Other thoughts?
I agree.
I was just going to show us.
How do you
This just so you hold that thought, I finally found it. So this is an example, Maurizio, of next gens, right? And we can revisit this. You have Katie Loeb, you've got a Venezuelan family office, advisors to family offices. I see Ken back there. Kevin Costner's definitely done things. So this is a group that came together, and and it's, you know, it's one of our groups. And so we could definitely, and the whole idea is to interconnect the groups for various purposes. And, you know, we did then, you remember we did an event, actually what kicked off, well, I think we had the impact event. Now the other thing, just so you know, we can bring more vestable product. I mean, you're an example of it, Maurizio. We should sort of get on with it, bring you on, right? And because we have to be systematic, we're FINRA governed, so we have to do that. We could bring on more impact-oriented. You know, one of the people that was in that room was Sophie Lasry. Her father is Mark Lasry, Avenue Capital, 12, 15 billion. They now have an impact private credit fund, which we're starting, you know, we were just sort of getting going. I don't know if Joe's still on the call here. Joe Zaro, are you on? I think not. Well, Joe and I were just partnering at the time. We could have brought them on. As we're looking for more win-win-win situations that definitely impact investing. But I'm trying to go beyond that and bring that full right side of that table. I think that'll complete the picture and provide better connectivity. Because if I know that somebody has an interest in the Amazon, that's a no-brainer for them to look at how they can make money and fulfill that goal. So my goal is to get everybody's passion projects identified so that we can bring the right impact investment as well.
Mark, can I say one other thing?
Of course.
When you,
I don't think I could keep you from saying anything.
When you ask, you know, what can you do? What can 361 firm do? I'm going to just say this where I think I'm going to channel Tom Jump, where I would say it's time to do that. We're spending a lot of time, a lot of energy surfacing issues that have been talked about over and over and over. And I think it might be a good idea to just jump in, do something. And I think that a lot of, it'll catalyze a lot of activity for 361 if there is a project that comes to fruition besides just surfacing issues.
So on the investment side, we're doing a lot, right? We're onboarding deals and getting them funded, but getting on the, if you're talking about the philanthropic, so yes, we'll get more of those deals going. And to Mauricio's point,
no, I'm talking about everything.
But if you're talking about philanthropic initiatives, you know, yeah, I guess we have to sort of study and think about which one we want to back. You know, maybe, and hopefully it's sort of part of our community. That would be organic. And you can't boil the ocean, but we can figure out, you know, one or two things and just. You know, one thing I really liked, I mean, it's just everybody's got their thing, but Eric Lindbergh is behind this program to give prisoners access to college education courses, which leads to college degrees, which reduces recidivism. And who's against that, right? You know, and I think that and if we can find the right champions to get behind things, then I'm all in favor. We can definitely pick a couple favorites and go for it.
Mark, I mean, if you can integrate risk in the measurement of return, you know, planting a tree is probably the lowest risk